Hello friends, this is Niladri once again. Welcome to Agile Digest. It's a long time that we recorded our last video and I got a couple of comments and notes that they want a very high level understanding if someone wants to start into Agile, why they will do it, and an introduction to Scrum. So this particular video is pretty much targeted to the new persons or the people who is trying to move into Agile and want to understand what exactly the Agile is and how we can work on Agile, what is Scrum and how we can proceed with that. Okay, so let's begin. And one more thing, at the end of this video we'll do some announcement that couple of more things that we are planning to start primarily on the Agile area and few of them on the technical areas as well. Okay, let's begin. So as you can see this particular screen, we are trying to understand first a traditional waterfall model, and we'll talk about waterfall model a little bit so that once we'll transitioning to Agile you will be able to correlate or map with how both waterfall and Agile is target to do a software development and the way of waterfall, how it is transitions to Agile. So let's try to understand this particular diagram where we are talking about a 1-year development plan. A typical way, the time what you are looking into here is 2 months, 1 month or 2 months, those are all hypothetical. These are the different stages we do when we develop on waterfall model. So we start from requirement gathering, analysis and planning, then design, development, testing, UAT and development. And if you see, it took almost a year to get the return of investment or to get the value from the development by the customers or by the end user, by the stakeholders or the business owners of the entire development. When you started, for an example, at January, you will be getting your results at close to December somewhere. So it depends on your duration. Sometimes it may be 8 months, 9 months, or sometimes it goes to 2 years as well. During this phase of development, these are the different phases you are looking into. So requirement gathering is one phase, analysis is one phase, design is one phase, development is one phase. You may be having 2 or 3 more or less of these particular stages what you have based on the nature of current development you are doing. And during this development, at every phase you may create some documents to support that particular phase development. And for an example, for the requirement gathering, you can create a requirement specification document. Analysis and planning, you can create a project planning. You can create a design specification that may be a functional design specification or systems specification. You can do the test cases and the defects. You will raise defects, you will fix them. You can create a test plan as well during the testing phase. Once you are doing UAT, they will be having a UAT test cases and complete all those documents once that is done, and then finally it will be done. Now there are few common action items when we do a development on waterfall model. As you can see, all these phase gates are listed here and it looks like a waterfall, and that's why it's also called a waterfall. And these are the common action items we do. So first we start with a preliminary analysis, then we do a system design, then requirement definition, work breakdown structure, we make a project plan, then we make a system design, then we do development, integration and testing, and then UAT, finally installation and deployment, and then maintenance or support that you do. That is the common action items, sequential way of development that we do. Now here we talk about some of the disadvantage when you work on waterfall. Once an application is in testing stage, it is very difficult to go back and change something that has not well thought out in the concept stage. So as you can understand, in the waterfall, the disadvantage we are getting is when you are reaching here at the testing stage, it is very difficult to go back because you already have spent the time for analysis, design, you developed and you crossed 6 months. Now if you found something, a large change, a big change on the concept side or even in the requirement side or even in the development side or even in the architectural side, it is very difficult to go back. And if you want to go back, you need to again start from the design or start from the development. It will take lots of extra time that you actually have planned, and extra time means extra cost. Similarly, no working software is produced until the late during the life cycle. So once you are even designing, development or testing, working software is not yet produced, because that will be deployed once you are verified by the UAT and then deployed into your production environment. There are high amount of risk and uncertainty when you are actually doing the analysis or designing, and even in the development. At that point of time, you don't have the visibility what will be the challenges come up when you will be deploying to staging environment, once you will be integrating with different system, once you will be deployed, and what will be the market trend. There are many different kind of uncertainty that you can't visualize at the design stage when you are working on waterfall, and that's why it's called not a good model for a complex and object oriented projects. So if it is very complex project and if you are doing it from the very beginning with many assumptions at the beginning that okay, if we make the designs, we can do the development based on the requirement, we may success, we may not success, we may need to tweak our architecture. There are many uncertainties that we taken care of and we think okay, that will be good. Similarly, a poor model for a long and ongoing project. So if you are kind of a ongoing projects you are doing, every month you are doing some enhancement, and you cannot plan a list of all the enhancement at the beginning and plan it accordingly and deploy it after 1 year or 1.5 years. That's not a good approach. Not suitable for a projects where requirements are not a moderate to high risk of changing. So if there is another situation, if the requirement is frequently changing, you already made a design based on the requirements, started development, and then requirement change. So in that kind of situation, this waterfall model doesn't give you enough flexibility to accommodate the frequent change on the requirement. Now let's talk about one more area. What are the different considerations we take when we work on waterfall? Now over here, requirements are very well known, clear and fixed. So you can do the software development with waterfall if the requirements are very well known and clear and fixed. If your product definition is stable, it's not changing very frequently. If technology is understood at very beginning, you know what exactly the architecture will be, what are the technologies will be using, what will the database will be using, how the data structure will be, how the data will be coming from different systems. All the technology is very well understood, then you can do a better development in waterfall. Similarly, there are no ambiguous requirement. Whatever the requirement is coming, it's in form of a big system functional requirement, and that documents it. There should not be any ambiguous requirement, otherwise we'll be repeating the same activities multiple times. And similarly, ample resource with required expertise are available freely. So when you are starting, all the resources what you have planned for, all the planning though are based on the expertise, experience from the resources, and based on that whatever you have planned, that resource has to be available from the beginning. Now let's try to make a transitions from waterfall. We understand what are the consideration, what are the challenges and how it works, what are the documents we prepared, and keeping that in mind, let's try to see can Agile help us sort out all these challenges and considerations we have. So let's try that. So before we jump into that, we'll try to understand this particular diagram where we're talking about two triangle. One is talking about traditional way, that's your waterfall, another is Agile, and there are two areas, one is fixed and variable. So if you look into traditional way or the waterfall way, your scope is always fixed. Once you have started, your requirement is fixed. What varies is time and cost. So if you have planned for 1 year, it may go to, let's assume 14 months or 15 months, and based on that your time will be changing. So we says in waterfall that okay, this is the requirement, tell me how much time or how much cost it will take, and time and cost can also vary. So our scope is fixed, what we calculate, that is the time and the cost. But here in Agile we says okay, see, we have a fixed amount of time and these are the total number of resource, so our cost is this much, and within this time and cost how much scope you can actually deliver. So you have a list of requirement in your product backlog or in some backlog. We'll talk about backlog later. On that requirement you identify within this time how much we can deliver based on the priority. Now let's try to understand. We are now transitioning from your waterfall to Agile. So over here we'll try to understand from this diagram. So this is a cake that I am developing using a waterfall, and over there you can see I have multiple layers of cakes, and each layer is just assume the first layer is requirement gathering, the second layer is analysis, third layer is design, then development, testing and UAT. So, until I am not done with all these layers, I will not be able to put it into market, and that is the waterfall. So, once we are ready with the entire cake, we can sell it a cake in the market. This is what happen is maybe creation of the cake or the development of the cake may take 1 month or 2 months or 3 months, even can be 1 year based on how big the cake you are making. By the time you are end up with developing the entire cake, your market trend might have changed. They may need a different flavor of cake. You realized, okay, the second layer what we have developed is having some issues, we need to change it. So, that way you will not be able to accommodate the change, but definitely you can make a cake using the waterfall model. If you want to make a cake, similar kind of cake using Agile, let's try to understand how we can do that. So, instead of making the entire cake, what we'll be doing is we'll be making different slice of cake once at a one. So, if you look into this particular cake, this is a one slice that we are targeting right now. I know these are the cakes we need to develop, but we will be developing one cake. This is a very high level on Agile. We will be talking about primarily I am considering the Scrum. We will talk about Scrum. There are many different framework where we may not have sprints. We have different ways of doing it, but I am just trying to make you understand the high level Agile, how it works. Over here I will be making one slice. Within that slice I will be having all those layers. I will be gathering the requirement, I will be doing the analysis, I will be doing designing, requirement, testing, UAT, everything I will be doing, but my target will be making one slice of cake instead of making the entire whole cake. So, I will be making all these layers, but just for the slice. So, if I target that, I will be able to make it in a much more shorter time, and I will put it into market once a slice is ready. Within 1 month or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I will be able to make some potentially shippable product that I can actually deliver to the market. That is the main concept of doing it in Agile, why we are developing it instead of a phase gated development, we are doing it as a whole for one portion of the development that have some values and that we can put it into market. Now, developing of this one slice, let us try to say this is a sprint 1. So, we will talk about sprint in little later, but here try to understand this is one sprint, and similarly we will be having sprint 2, sprint 3, sprint 4, sprint 5, sprint 6, and we will be making different slices based on the market need, based on the stakeholders requirement, and we will be making finally a one cake with different values, and finally all the values combinedly make the entire product, and that is what your differentiation between waterfall and sprints on a very high level. Now, let us try to understand. Even if you in waterfall you do a release, so if you might have understand, okay, there are different modules we develop, we will do in module 1 in first year and release it, and then we will work for the module 2 for the second year. So, those are the different systems you are making. You are not making a portions of one system, a valuable shippable product in waterfall. But here let's assume that okay, what we have planned is for 21 weeks we have 3 release that we are planning, and we are doing a agile way of development. So, let us assume that your sprint is a time box, or also you can say it as iteration, how many iteration we will be doing. So, in 21 weeks we can have 7 iteration, and we are actually planning after third iterations we will be make one release whatever is developed. So, again whatever you have completed is not depends on that you must have do a release. It's whatever you have developed, you can make it ready for deployment, but deployment is totally depends on the stakeholders or business owners decision when they want to put it into the market. So, this is what they have initially planned for. You can do a small releases in between, because at the end of every sprint you will be ready with your slice and you can release it. But this is, let us assume your business owner's decision is they will be releasing 3 slice of cake at one time, then they will be releasing 5 slice at release 2 and all the entire cake at release 3. Keeping that in mind, let us assume that what we are doing within the sprint 1. So, within sprint 1 we are still doing the analysis, design, development, testing, UAT. That UAT terms I am actually using because that is relate with your waterfall, but primarily this is not UAT what we are talking about. I will explain it in details. And similarly, all these activities you do for each sprint, only difference is the scope of analysis is just for the scope of that particular slice of cake for the sprint 1. Similarly, you have, let us assume that you have a requirement of 2 or 3 functionalities that you are developing, you will be analyzing those 2 or 3 functionalities. Similarly, you will be making a design keeping in those 2 or 3 functionalities and development. There are one more areas that is called ongoing activities, is not directly related with your sprint, that is your requirement gathering and understanding. This is a ongoing activities, it not directly related to any sprint scope. What you do is whatever the requirement you have, you keep on gathering, you keep on refining the requirement. You still, if you are visualizing that you have only one requirement, that is a requirement specification in Agile, what we do is we create user stories, or there is a small functionalities, maybe the list of functionalities called user stories stacked into one place called product backlog, and from there you are actually making the number of user stories refined, discussing with the development team and make it ready for your future sprint. So, if you have 100 user stories, that means there are 100 functionalities, very small functionalities. Your team can work on at least 10 functionalities or 8 functionalities at one sprint. So, you are doing development and designing, executing your sprint 1, but at the same time you are doing some requirement gathering and understanding for your future sprint. So, that is why it is called requirement gathering and understanding an ongoing activity. So, once you are done with sprint 1, you do not need to do a requirement gathering for sprint 2, because you already have gathered some requirement that will be working for sprint 2. So, that is called a future readiness that we will do for in terms of your backlog. Now, we will go to the next point, that is prioritization. So, now I know I have 100 items in my backlog. I am working on first 10 items, but for sprint 2 or sprint 3 or sprint 4, I need to do some prioritization, so that immediately once we will complete the sprint 1, I have something ready to start working for sprint 2. I do not need to run around, I need to talk with multiple peoples what we will be working on. So, that gives a clear visibility, okay, this is what we are currently working on, and this is our list of user stories for future sprint. There is something called definition. So, there are some disciplines we follow, we will talk about all those disciplines, and keeping that disciplines in mind, we need to make some definitions. When I am saying that okay, this story is ready for sprint 2, what is the definition of the ready? If I am saying okay, this story I have done everything what is expected and this is ready to deploy, but what exactly the definition of done, why you are saying? So, those are the different definitions that you create and follow them for 4 sprint, 5 sprint, and after that if you think there is a point of revisions, you can do it. The suggestions is we do not change the definition every sprint, we keep it for at least 4-5 sprints and see how it is performing or how the team is performing, keeping those definitions in the place. Now, once this is done, what you are actually developing at the sprint 1, you are developing one slice, and every sprint you are making one slice, and at the end of your sprint you will be done with the entire cake, that is the whole product. At the beginning of every sprint you do some estimation and plan for that sprint, and similarly you do some development, you do some deployment activities or delivery activities if required at the end of the sprint there for that particular sprint. So, at the beginning of the every sprint you do estimation and plan, and then at the end of every sprint you deliver it, and that is way we do a sprint level or iteration level development in an agile way. And once your all these sprints are done, that there is no further backlog item is ready, or when you decided okay, this is the total planned iterations or sprints or weeks, this is done, we can see our product is completed with the last sprint, and this is the way you will be developing your product using agile way of development. Now, there are few principal disciplines that I am not going into much details, you can actually read that from agilemanifesto.org. I'm just talking about the 4 values. It depends on 4 values and 12 principles when we talking about agile way of development. So there are many different frameworks you can see. There are agile, there are Kanban, there are scale agile, there are Spotify, there are many other frameworks. All of them, they are actually having their own values or principle, but their own values or own principle is actually inheriting from the core values of these 4 values and 12 principles. So this is the core of agile way of development. So let's talk about the 4 values. When I am talking about individuals and interactions over process and tools, and similarly we are saying working software over comprehensive documentation. What is written in the blue over here, that is saying do more of that. And process and tools, it's not says that you stop doing it, it says give more values to individual and interactions than process and tool. Similarly, focus more on working software than comprehensive documentation. It's not saying that you don't need to do any documentation. If it is absolutely required, do that, but working software should be your primary focus. Instead of contract negotiations, you can start more on customer collaboration and responding to change over following a plan. So you can create small plans, but your primary focus will be responding to the change. This is the 4 values that Agile says, and 12 principles. Again, I am not reading through. If you get a chance, go to this particular link, that is where you will be getting the 12 principles of Agile Manifesto. Now we will talk about few of the popular framework within Agile. Primarily we will be talking about Scrum today. So Scrum and Kanban, that can be worked as a team level if you have a large organizations, if you want to scale up your agility from one team to multiple teams, from portfolio, from your different solutions, then there are different frameworks we will be having. We will be covering a couple of videos on these frameworks later, but today our primary focus is talk about a high level on the Scrum, how it works. So you have SAFe, the scaled agile framework, discipline agile delivery, large scale Scrum, Spotify, there is Nexus, there are many other frameworks nowadays. But if you understand Agile, Scrum, that is your stepping stone to start working on these particular any different frameworks. So what we will talk about Scrum, let's try to understand this framework within Agile, how this works, and we will talk about few of the Scrum values. So before we go deep into Scrum, the Agile as a core has some values, Scrum also have some values, but all those values is also keeping the Agile values within and adding some more values if you want to do Scrum. So there is something as a team, the courage you need to work. So what it says, the team member know they have the courage to work through conflict and challenge together so that they can do the right thing. That's the courage. We work as a team. When we talked about Agile or Scrum, it's very important to work as a team, and the team is more important here rather than individual. Commitment. So this is when we talk about a commitment, the team members individually commit to achieve their team goals each and every sprint. So what you can correlate that we have multiple sprints at beginning of the every sprint, the team commits for few requirements and they stick to that requirement as a goal, and the entire team have follow one goal for that sprint. So that commitment is very important when we work on Scrum. Then you have focus. Focus is the team members focus exclusively on their team goals and the sprint backlog. There should be no work done other than through their backlog. When we are talking about backlog, there are product backlog where you have 100 user stories or 100 small functionalities. You have a sprint backlog that may have 8 to 10 user stories that you have committed for that iteration, and once you have started working on, you will be focusing on those 8 to 10 user stories that you have committed for the team. You, in the sense the team, they will not be working on anything else apart from what their commitment is, and if you do that, you will get the maximized values from your Scrum team. Then you have respect. Team member respect each other to be technically capable and to work with good intent. So this is very important when you are working as a team. Respecting others is very important. That's why sometimes if someone is not available, someone is gone on sick leave, other people can there they can help them and fill the gap of the absence of that team. And openness, this is also one of the big values or very important values when we work on the Scrum. So openness is the team member and their stakeholders agrees to be transparent about their work and any challenges they face. This transparency is very important. So these are the Scrum values. Now try to understand what exactly the Scrum framework is. So we already know, okay, from the traditional way how it was, and then Agile, how it is separating it out within Agile or Scrum. Let's try to understand what exactly the Scrum is. So this diagram is don't get confused, it's not complicated. So what we talked about, anything you above the dotted line is the ongoing activities. So we have a backlog items and the product owners doing the prioritizations and grooming and making some user stories, those are ready and groomed. Groomed in the sense refined or discussed with the development team and estimated. So those are the different ways of doing that. You can actually go through the different videos for each and every item. So I have videos on prioritizations, I have videos on grooming or how you are doing it. So you can find each and every item's video already there in this YouTube. Now there are a few definitions we talked about. These are the definition of ready and definitions of done. That is also an ongoing activity. You make it, let's assume every quarter, you revise it every quarter. There are a few events or ceremonies within every sprint. So when we talk about sprint or iterations, within that there are a couple of events that we do. It starts with a sprint planning, maybe end with a review or retrospective. So at the beginning of every sprint, you plan your capacity, how many team members you have, who have how many leaves, what is the company holidays, how many hours they will be working on. Based on that you got an capacity. Similarly, the capacity can be planned based on your velocity, we will talk about that later, but just to try to understand, if you are starting with understanding your Agile, coming from waterfall mindset, just think about, okay, your capacity is the number of hours available for the team members for that sprint duration. Now you do a sprint planning based on that capacity and your available requirement in ready state, how much stories you can pick to complete within that iterations, that may be 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever it is, or the sprint. So iteration and sprint, just think about, those are the two same thing, two names, same thing. Now once your stories are selected, the team can define a sprint goal for getting a common goal for the entire team and make a sprint backlog from the product backlog. So PBI here is product backlog item. We pick few of the product backlog item and make our sprint backlog with the selected sprint selected stories for that sprint. That is day 1 of your 2 weeks period or 3 weeks period. From the next day onwards, you will start executing the sprint, you will do the development, you will do the testing, you will do all your activities that we have planned for analysis, design, development, testing, test case creation, everything you will do. You will, there is one event every day you will do, that's called daily scrum call or daily stand up meeting. You will meet for 15 minutes to make a strategy for the date and just talk about if there is any impediments, what the team has done, and they will just check how they are progressing towards the sprint goal. That is what they the team does. And once you reach to the end of the sprint, maybe on the last date, you will be so the sprint review, definitely you can you can have a sprint review where the team mostly give a demonstration of what they have developed to the stakeholders and business owner. Stakeholders and business owner also explain their expectations, their ideas of the market change information and what they are expecting from the team from the next or future sprints. Retrospective is the area where you retrospect on the sprint process you follow, because when we talked about Agile, it's have lots of disciplines that we need to follow, lots of areas that we need to mature up and how we are doing our agility, keeping those in mind. You can have the video on sprint planning, details of sprint planning, details of capacity planning, details of sprint review, details of retrospective, and your sprint backlog, what it is, in this channel, and you can actually find out in much more depth. Now, this retrospective what I'm talking about, you can do it on the last day, or you can even do 2-3 days later also. It doesn't have a direct relations with that sprint, but sprint review I'll always suggest do it on the last day, so that the next day will be start your sprint, and you can have a better visibility what exactly the plan is, and what exactly the scope is, what exactly the priority is, what exactly the expectation is. Similarly, the retrospective, if you do it on the last day, that's better if you can do it, so that if there is any action items came up from the retrospective, that you can start implementing from the next day. Now, again here, once you are done, you are making the potential shippable product increment. So, you are making it ready to be deployed. Again, when it will be deployed, that decision will be take up. You can do it immediate deployment, you can do it in some release pipeline or some area where you can put it for ready to be deployed, and later when the decision will come up to be deployed, they will be deploying it. I'll talk about few roles and responsibility they will be performing to do all these activities in a little while, but as of now you understood what exactly the flow is and how the sprint works, and let's try to understand this framework in a little bit more. If we talk about Scrum, there are 5 areas that we'll be talking about: requirement, team or the people, process, tools, and the engineering practice. If we talk about requirements, your backlog, product backlog and sprint backlog has all the requirements. If you talk about the team and people, the product owner, scrum master and development team are the key role of Scrum. And if you talk about a Scrum team, the Scrum team has 3 roles: product owner, Scrum master and development team. So, product owner primarily is the person who is advisable from the business side or from the stakeholder sides or from the end user sides, who not the end user, maybe from the business side, who understand what exactly the expectation is and participates with the team as a team member to do the development. Process, there can be many different processes, there are ceremonies, there are definitions, there are artifacts, there are Scrum, Kanban, there are many different processes. What we are talking about, there is Scrum. Scrum is primarily a framework. I am just categorizing in process because I am just taking what are the different process or the frameworks we follow here. Tools, there are many ALM tools you may need to start working on. For an example, Jira, Rally, TFS, version 1, those are the different popular ALM tools in the market that is used to do your agile life cycle management. And engineering practice, there are TDT, test driven development or acceptance test driven development or Crystal. Let's not focus on that right now because that's need a little expertise or little advanced learning once we will be doing that. But for now, these are the 5 core areas when we work on Agile and Scrum. We need to understand how the requirement is, who will be executing the requirement, what process they will flow, in what tools, using what engineering practice. Now, let us try to understand the Scrum Insights. So, when we talk about Scrum Insights, I am just trying to give few ideas in a bullet point that you will be able to learn in other videos already there in YouTube. So, for an example, ceremonies or events of Scrum. So, all the events that we do that you just observed on the diagram: capacity and sprint planning, daily Scrum call, sprint review, sprint retrospective, backlog refinement or grooming or prioritizations. These are different events we do within one sprint, that 3 weeks, that 2 weeks of time box. You can get all these details, videos on each and every ceremonies, how that happens, what is the outcome, what is the reports we developed, and that's what you need to understand how it works. Key areas, there are some estimation area is little different than waterfall way. We do a story point estimation, that's you need to understand how the requirement is actually captured in forms of user stories. That is one area you need to understand. So, estimation, that's on story points, requirement in form of user stories, and visual boards or Scrum boards, how we are actually having our development progress visible to everyone in a form of board. Roles and responsibilities in Scrum. Product owner, Scrum Master and development team are the key roles within Scrum. Artifacts of Scrum: product backlog, sprint backlog and burndown chart. These are the three primary artifacts. DOR and DOD is not treated as a artifacts, but just to categorize within the screen, I just put it into the artifact box. But definition of ready and definition of done are some documents, but those are not counted as a artifacts. Few popular reporting in Scrum: you can make few reports like grooming updates, sprint planning summary, mid-week progress summary, sprint closure summary, retrospective action items. Those are the different popular reports and very generic report that you can create for your team. I will not say generic, those are the very popular and common reports. You can create it for your team, your particular sprint and circulate with all interested parties. Few metrics that you can follow using Scrum is velocity trend, commitment reliability, capacity utilization, scope change, defect leakage, backlog health. Those are the few common metrics. You can find many more metrics in different websites. There are, if you think any other metrics is useful for you, you can use that. And I have one video for understanding all these metrics. I think I have many videos on all the events. I will be making few, I have all the videos for estimations or user stories or visual boards. I will be making few videos to understanding the roles and responsibilities and artifacts soon, and also on the reporting sections. I think this is what we had intended to cover today, to give you an high level idea what exactly the Scrum is and how it works. And if you have any questions, you can drop a comment here. I will happy to help you. Thank you for watching, and before we just close up, I just want to make one announcement that we will be doing some YouTube live on different meetups that we are doing at our local area. We will talk about scaled agile, we will talk about Scrum, we will talk about agile anti-patterns, and we will talk about DevOps. So, we will be doing meetups and we will do our live telecast within a channel, and I hope you will like it. So, keep on watching. We will have our Agile Digest WhatsApp group where we are publishing when we will be having that schedule and how we will be doing it. I think that will be helpful for you if you are interested on any topics. And also within Agile Digest sites, we have a event calendar, what day, what webinar we are having, what day, what different meetups we are having with what topics, who is the speakers and all. Thank you all. We'll see you once again on the next video. I think the X is missing on this net. We'll fix it up. Till the next time, thank you everyone. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.